Hello, good morning. Welcome to all of you here. It's really a pleasure to be again introducing two leading politicians in Europe. Our friend Sigrid Kaag, Vice President and Minister of Finance in Netherlands, and Nadia Calviño, Vice President and Minister of Economy in Spain. They are going to talk about Europe and what is going on in Europe, how it's going to recovery, how are the plans, the policies we are going to see developing in the coming months. We are very short of time, just we have 1 hour, therefore we have decided to go directly to the Q&A session. I am going to make some questions to the ministers. They are going to answer. We are going to be in a process of maybe 2-3 questions more, and afterwards we will open the floor for people in the room. If you have any question, please send to me, and I will read the question myself. Or people who are behind the screen on streaming, if you have any question, please send to actividades@rielcano.org, actividades@rielcano.org. Send the question, and I will got it, and I will try to formulate to the minister. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Sigrid, for being here. I think that the first question, it's very clear. We are in a very different situation that we were 12, 14, 24 months ago. We are growing again. We are going back to normality. And one of the key points of normality is how we are going to redefine the Stability and Growth Pact. Maybe this is the first question that for a Minister of Economy, it's really very important to address. Markets, people, citizens, the stability of all the building of Europe depends on how we are going to reformulate these rules. And I think I will begin asking their opinions on this, how to reformulate the Stability and Growth Pact. Of course, everybody knows that the European Commission has presented a comprehensive proposal, that discussions are beginning, but during the Spanish presidency, we need to reach an agreement on that, and maybe to have your assessment on the quality, the content, and the possibility of reaching this agreement. I think it will be due. First, maybe I am asking Sigrid to start with.
Yes,
Sigrid.
Well, thank you very much. Delighted to be here, and thanks also for Nadia for making time in her busy schedule. And interestingly enough, I think Nadia and I are kindred spirits in more than one way, not only where we came from before we entered national politics, but we've also struck a chord when certainly I started as Minister of Finance, and we decided early on, from the start of the cabinet of Rutte IV, our Prime Minister, to really team up together to demonstrate how different countries, different paths, but at the same time a strong unity of purpose to present a joint paper, which is known, of course, as the Spanish-Dutch non-paper when it comes to the Stability and Growth Pact. And from our perspective, we are delighted to see that many of the ideas, even they were brush strokes, were taken over by the Commission when it comes to the country specificity, to give a debt reduction pathway that is really built from a DSA. It is not a one shoe has to fit all type of analogy, and I think we are also ambitious on the targets for debt reduction, and we want to be sure that actually debt reduction happens, but also that enough space is left for investment and reforms. Now, it's the triangle. It's almost a holy triangle, if I may be stating this in a secular way, because the three hold each other together. You cannot have one without the other two components. And I think that's been one of the elements where the old Stability and Growth Pact, where it went wrong. We saw no debt reduction, but also insufficient reforms and insufficient investments. So we need to push on all three angles, where we will be having a discussion, of course, amongst all of us as member states with the Commission. How do we measure? The methodology is an important one. We are in favor of certain vanguards, or that will really make sure that we keep the balance and that we can measure and that we can monitor in an effective manner. I also don't like to speak too much of the word compliance, but we need to seek alignment and we need to see implementation by all member states. Let's start with the Netherlands first and foremost. If we commit to a debt reduction pathway, we want it to be anti-cyclical, we want to be country-specific, and we want it to be risk-based. But yet we need to be able to demonstrate towards the others, the Commission, but our fellow member states, that we're actually doing what we said we would be doing. We're doing it against a time frame and that we are transparent about it, both politically, but also from a shared risk that ultimately we're undertaking together. So the safeguards and the methodology, we haven't yet pinpointed a percentage to. We want to discuss this with member states when we're formally launching the process. But we think a numerical criterion is important, and that's different from the 1%. The 1% we believe is not helping us, and it may end up being pro-cyclical. So this in broad brush, but I think it's also an important moment for me to meet with Nadia today to see again how we can team up, where we can align, how we can encourage the Commission to move forward. And it's the Spanish presidency, so all our hopes are on the Spanish presidency, all our hopes are on Nadia. Her ability and capability will help us hopefully achieve ultimately a final product at the end of this year, calendar year, because it's too important for Europe to succeed. We must have a reformed Stability and Growth Pact from my perspective. It's a political failure of Europe too. Sorry, a long introduction, but it's an early morning.
Very clear, and I fully agree with what you have said. First, I am sure that Nadia is not going to deceive. she's going to be up to the challenge. And second, I think it's true. We need good rules, good policies, but also we need reputation and credibility and delivering results. And this is the way that these policies really work. And therefore, we are very, very happy to see that you are backing the idea of measuring and controlling the effectiveness and the delivering of each country. That's important. Nadia?
No, well, first of all, let me welcome you, Sigrid. Indeed, it is a great honor, and I'm extremely happy that you came to Madrid. And I think, let me start there. I think that persons matter at the end of the day. And the fact that you and I see things quite alike, and since day one, we liked each other, and we thought, okay, we're going to do something together to the benefit of the European Union, and we have a similar background. You just said we come from international organizations, now in national politics. I think that actually made a difference, and I do think that our non-paper that we drafted together has had a very important influence, not only on the wording of the proposal of the European Commission, but on the atmosphere around the room. Because most countries would agree that the rules that we had were not fit for purpose before, even less so after the pandemic hit us, because all member states have seen an increase in their debt to GDP and deficit to GDP ratios. So we need to make sure that we have the right rules that allow us to pursue the path of fiscal responsibility and fiscal discipline, but in a manner which is compatible with growth and job creation. And from this point of view, I think we captured the spirit and the atmosphere in the room and really focused the minds on what we can build on instead of what divides us. Yeah. And then the fact that two countries that traditionally had been put in very different silos and very different camps, you know, from all points of view, writing a paper together, I think we took everybody by surprise, actually. And a number of people were afterwards saying, oh, I'm sorry, I was not part of that. I would have liked maybe to. But we showed the way, you know, we have to really leave the old trenches behind, focus on what unites us and build on that basis. And that's the Commission's proposal. So since then, we've been working together. And I indeed think that our cooperation is going to be key to succeed under the Spanish presidency. We will have a number of very important files coming to fruition, to maturity at the end of the year. And we need to be able to have a package which everybody can subscribe to, including the reform of the fiscal rules, which we indeed need to agree by the end of the year, but also the European budget, midterm review, new own resources, artificial intelligence regulations, which are also very relevant for our present and our future, the reform of energy markets and energy market regulation. banking union, capital markets union, many other, the digital euro, the number of files that will be on our table is really impressive. But I really count on the Netherlands and Spain working together and being a force for good, if I may call it this way, as being one of the drivers and the levers for us to reach a good agreement by the end of the year.
Thank you. I fully agree. When you have too many topics, or so many topics, not too many, so many topics, the possibilities of negotiation increase because losers and winners are normally distributed and you can make some trade-offs. And in this sense, in fact, when you look at what is going on in Europe, you see now that there are 3, 4, 5 big topics, big issues that are going to really have an impact on the welfare and the lives of the European citizens. We need to mobilize resources to invest because we have things such as important and in some way so new in the last 30 years and a new set of industrial policy regulation which are very important to accelerate the green transition, the digital transition. We need to confront the problem of the deglobalization or reglobalization and how we are going to accommodate our position as an important partner in this world with China and United States. We need to see where we are, what are we going to do with China, de-risking, decoupling. Maybe you will, both of you, comment on these big issues. Investment, we need to invest. Where is the industrial policies going? Which are the way to analyze the position of the countries, how we can really reinforce and push for the green transition and the digital transition, and how we can deal with China and United States and the rivalry and our autonomy, strategic autonomy that we talk so much. Please, maybe now, Nadia, after
Yes, and let me 2 points from my side, but this is an issue where we can have a dialogue, because it is so multifaceted. There's so many dimensions to it. I think that right now we're living, I use this simile very often, but I do think it's the best one that reflects it. It's really that the basis on which the world global order was set and based since the end of Second World War, these tectonic plates are shifting. They are shifting, and they're leading to clashes in some areas or gaps in others as they pull apart. And this movement is shown in the areas of economy and finance, energy, security, technology, but also values. And I would like to say that right now, we need to be very much aware that the European power in the world is an economic power. I mean, Europe is a trade powerhouse, and we should not feel underwhelmed. I mean, we are the most important trading partner for all different jurisdictions around the world, and we are an economic and trading powerhouse. So we need to ensure that we go forward with strategic autonomy, competitiveness of the European industry. This will be one of the top priorities of our presidency, of course. But we are also a beacon of human rights and democratic values. And this is extremely important these days. And this is something that both Sigrid and I, being women, and feminist women that defend human rights, and I think we both share also the values in the sense of inclusiveness, in the sense of equality, fairness, thinking about the whole of the population and trying not to leave anybody behind. And that approach is also the European way of life. And I think that is also a very important feature that we need to bear in mind when we're discussing all these issues, from artificial intelligence to technology. After Sigrid takes the floor, I would like to come back to this, because I have a couple of specific ideas in this regard.
No, I think I can only align with what Nadia says. If you asked a number of really big topics, big questions around the topic, so maybe also by way of an introduction, I think this is a moment where Europe really needs to choose whether we finally mature, we grow up. I think the illegal invasion, the Russian invasion and war in Ukraine has demonstrated we can fast forward and have unity of purpose, politically, militarily, economically, and also when it comes to humanitarian support, we've chosen to do that. We've fast forwarded that. We've also learned lessons from Corona that we need to work differently. And very often it's about decision making and it's leadership. And that's been demonstrated. Now, do we have the means? Yes, we do have the means. We are the largest internal market, as Nadia says. We are a preferred trading partner for so many countries through international trade agreements, new style, human rights focused, green, inclusive. We can also not only promote, encourage, but we can make sure that actually re-globalization occurs in a way that it actually does distribute the wealth and the gains for all people, because globalization as an old agenda has not. We've seen that. Inequality has broadened and has been reinforced. So I think that's a second lever. Thirdly, the means. What type of economic growth do we want to see? AI is the biggest disruptor since the Industrial Revolution, but we need to harness it to be an asset. And so we need to be a front runner. We need to invest in the technologies of the future. We need to establish the learning profiles for people whose jobs will be phased out, that they can catch up. Because the risk to the current middle class is that fast and furiously their jobs will actually disappear, but it should offer new opportunities. And then there's the regulation and the legislation to shield from harm the unintended consequences of AI, which can be tremendous. So we need to be a front runner. We can only do this if we are united, if the member states have the political will and courage to do so, and truly also if we make the resources available. And often I think domestically it's the same as at an international level or EU. We end up as the Americans say, sweating the small stuff. And we lose sight of the bigger picture. And I hope at this point, this time in our history, we will not lose sight of the bigger picture because we are a community of values. And we need to tackle the erosion and the erosion of the rule of law within the European Union. It's not only happening externally, it's happening internal to our union as well. So we need to keep our eyes on the ball both ways.
No, absolutely. And as I was listening to you, there are three concrete examples of files that are going to be discussed under our presidency in the second part of the year, which I think are really instrumental to this shaping the new world, harnessing new technological developments. Let me just mention these three that have come to my mind as I was listening to Sigrid and in my introductory remarks. First, as you know, I am chairing the IMFC.
Yeah.
And we will be having the annual meetings in Marrakesh. We're now in the road to Marrakesh, and there are a number of countries around the world that feel that they have been left behind. As you were saying, globalization has not worked to the benefit of everybody. So there are a number of countries that are more and more aligned under the Global South kind of club that say, well, it's all very, very well, we're worried about Ukraine, we're worried about this and that, the war is affecting us negatively, but we've been having this kind of situation for many decades and nobody cared. And by the way, this whole technological war and economic war is maybe going to hurt us too. So we need support, we need financial support. I think this is going to be critical, that in the annual meetings, we provide responses to these countries and we show that the international world order and the international financial institutions are working to their benefit. Yeah. That means debt relief for most vulnerable countries, reinforcing the firepower of the IMF and other institutions, having a narrative that is inclusive because we need allies also in this brave new world. Likewise, second issue that will be on the table, trade agreements. Yeah. So being Spain, obviously we're extremely interested in pressing ahead with the trade agreements and trade negotiations with Latin American countries. That is Chile, Mexico, and Mercosur. Yeah. President Lula was here some weeks ago. We were discussing these issues. It is extremely important, and we have no time to lose because these countries should be our allies also from a geopolitical point of view. And trade agreements work to the benefit of both communities if they're crafted in the right manner. And environmental considerations should be a key element of these trade agreements. Luckily, President Lula is sensitive to this and is committed to protecting the Amazonas. which was not the case with Bolsonaro in the past. So we have a window of opportunity on this file, which I think is extremely important. Third example is the whole discussion about how are we going to deal with the war in Ukraine and how to make sure that we enhance the resilience of Ukraine, and how do we embed these into our budgets, because the needs are enormous. We need to continue to support Ukraine, and there's a very strong political commitment. We need to put our money where our mouth is.
Yeah,
so in the midterm review of the multi-annual financial framework and the European budget, how are we going to ensure a stable framework for providing financial support to Ukraine going forward? Just to mention 2-3 files that under the Spanish presidency are really having a transformational and a strategic impact on the future of Europe. We could also talk about artificial intelligence, all the others too, no? But these 3 files in the economic side of things and the ECOFIN family are going to be, top of our priorities and very important from a strategic point of view.
If I may add one observation, what often hampers us still, and we discuss this as ministers of finance, that we talk about a lot of the issues that matter. For instance, what you just mentioned, the Global South, how we actually finance their requirements. And it's not the old-fashioned way through official development assistance, which is important. It's a cornerstone of our international solidarity and engagement. But all these countries have always said we want to go from aid to trade. We want investors, we want to create jobs, enable us to do it ourselves. And I think the Macron-Motley Summit, as it's coined, later this month in Paris, is an important stepping stone also to revisit how we invest, how we make money available, under which conditions to whom, to help them also become climate resilient, because the least emitters are the most affected by modes of production and consumption which are not their own. They don't have the level of economic growth, but they're impacted by it. So these discussions are also a demonstration of engagement, solidarity, and being a real partner to the Global South. But ultimately, we also need to ask ourselves, are we fit for purpose to be a serious global player? And in all these levels, we need to make this happen. And on Ukraine, you triggered something. I think it's very fair to observe we need to be a predictable partner. There too, we need to continue to walk the talk, way past elections, way past electoral outcomes that we are uncertain of, be it in Europe or the United States. But we have to anticipate, we have to shore up the support to Ukraine for as long as it takes, for whatever it takes, because that cannot be a volatile issue. That can be exploited, and it could lead to undermining, also to the actual war effort that the people of Ukraine are undertaking.
But if I may add one thing, she's put on the table, you're spot on one issue, which is this technological competition that we're witnessing. At the end of the day, the Global South countries, they will look at us and say, okay, it's China against the US and Europe, but all these technologies that are going to be the technologies of the future, be it digital technologies, green technologies, are we going to have some access to them? Are we going to have to pay enormous amounts for them? I think that the one issue that we need to put on the table in the autumn, for sure, is how to ensure that these developments are public goods. Correct. Because these are global public goods. Fighting climate change is not only an issue of most developed countries, it's a global issue.
It's a global good.
So I think that this will be a key issue that, at least from the Spanish point of view, and I think from the European point of view, we should seriously work on how to ensure that these technologies are then made available in one manner or another, so that the whole world can actually accompany this process of modernization, and not only the most developed countries, widening again the gap with those that are most vulnerable.
The consequences of our inaction are so great, even from a rational or even economic perspective, it's totally unsound not to act. Beyond that, I think we both share the same conviction, I think all of us, that we need to do it from a viewpoint of shared humanity, and then everybody needs to play their role and do their part. But ultimately also it is harmful and dangerous not to act.
Absolutely.
For those who do not want to do it out of altruism.
Some work we have been doing in the Real Instituto Elcano. just preparing the Spanish presidency that support what both of you have been saying. First, I will make a comment that maybe not for you, but for some people, it's really important. The European Union is not starting to think in these terms now.
Correct.
Has been doing a lot of work previously on trade, on technological transfer, on human rights, on regulation. And this is very important because when you look at what think these global South, Latin American countries, in fact, on what the European Union thinks about them and what they expect from us, it's really very important. We have made a poll among the policymakers there and here, and the results are great because they point out the need to lever on two things. First, on the past, and second, to make very good and balanced statements of which are our priorities and how we need to face them. And I explain what I'm saying. If you listen to European politicians, it seems that for them, the Global South is just a place to pick up allies and to pick up minerals and resources for the green transition. If you go to Latin America and you ask, how do you see Europe? They say, Europe, it's a market. Is the place where the investors are, and we need investment, and is where the technology is. If you don't put together these dots, it's very difficult to reach agreements. You need to balance your position and to have a very broad approach. But the good thing is that the broad approach is possible. And you are saying that you are ready to adapt. Therefore, that's important. The second point is history. When you go and see which are the countries which are in Latin America, in the Global South, which are more prone to reach agreements with Europe, is those countries to which the European Union has signed preferential agreements in the past, trade agreements and investment agreements.
Yeah.
This cooperation works. They pay dividend. They don't. It's really very important to have this broad picture. We are going to present this paper in the coming week, and I think it's going to be quite interesting because they point to the needs to balance statements and to have this broad vision you both have. It's economics, it's political, it's the decision to act now and to have this broad view that we are talking about public good, global public good, that we need to deal with. One of the things that maybe it's also could be also interesting to have your opinions, or is that, okay, investment does not happen just because you want to invest. Investment happens if you have the incentives and you have the finance. Incentives, to me, are clear. You are designing the incentives to promote investment. But where is the finance coming? And this creates some also unexpected trade-offs. I have read a paper on the European Commission which say that to get the net zero, Europe needs to have additional investment for $450 billion every year. This is something like 5% of total investment. In Europe, 2% of total consumption. I don't know if you can do that without having a much more view of a much more plan of how you are going to deal with that. And afterwards comes the money. Where comes the money? The European banks, just the European capital markets, they are really not as big as US capital markets, UK capital markets. How do we face this problem of fragmentation of our institutional framework for finance investment? With the need, we have to increase and to make a very big jump on our investment projects and financing.
Yeah, Just to make sure, are you talking about where it comes from, or you're also looking at the budgets? Is your question also asking me about
public money? Public money
sure.
is going to be there,
Yes.
sure, but
Yeah.
private money is also
Yes.
needed.
No, it's a discussion which you can apply to Europe, but of course also internationally. We all know on many of the big challenges we face, climate change or tackling climate change to start with, or the green transition, we need to look at the private sector. I mean, we'd be fooling ourselves. The governments can only be catalytic. Be that if we're looking at the IMF or the bank, or if we're looking just at Europe. From our perspective, our ambition will still be that we make real headway in terms of the deliverables of the Capital Markets Union. However, probably the reality check here calls on some modesty when it comes to the speed of delivery, considering this is an old discussion. But the change is, I think, that also now at the leadership level again, of von der Leyen and others, they've really retabled this, made this a priority. Say we cannot make serious headway as a union. Yes, we can always haggle over the budget and what would be own resources, etc., and how much and how we'll do it. This will happen too. But the real lever of change will be the private sector. So we need to remove the barriers. And I think we need to go for sort of the bigger bangs. Now, we can talk about the procedures, or we can talk about the taxes, or the system reforms, but this has to be a political choice. And we often get stuck in the detail. Now, in this case, the devil is in the detail. But the private sector and the financial markets are keen to invest. They also need a stable legislative environment. I think they also need to know which areas will be priority. We need to be clear on an easing of state aid where needed. So you build the enabling environment for the investors to know this sector will move fast, it won't move fast. And then, of course, generally at a national level, credibility and predictability on taxation, on the levies. These would be pillars for me. But am I optimistic? I have to be honest. My expectations are not up to the roof. Is it important? Will we battle? Will we support Nadia during the presidency to make headway? Yes. Similarly, the president of the Eurogroup, Pascal Donoghue, has been carrying the cross almost of the banking union. And when you look at the permeant contradictions or the two positions, we all preach to the same choir, but we expect the other choir to sort of lower their tone. So we're not making headway. The proposals are on the table. So the appetite for political risk-taking, almost I would say, needs to be there in order to arrive at a compromise that is workable. Because this, again, would attest to the credibility of the union to say we are serious about the two pillars we need. Capital Market Union, to drive that agenda, and the banking union. But
I was laughing when you were saying that they carry a cross, because when we took office in 2018, you know, I invested a lot of time and energy in the banking union, and we worked together with the Germans, and we didn't make a lot of headway. We didn't have any major breakthrough, to be frank. So I very much see the similarity, you know, with the idea that we're carrying a burden. But I think that I fully agree with you. It's the private sector that needs to be mobilized. One interesting similarity between the Netherlands and Spain, I think, is the importance of the agri-food sector,
yes,
which is one of the key levers for facing climate change and adapting our economies to these new and bringing on this new green economy, you know, in this area. And this is an area where you are one of the world superpowers. We are one of the world superpowers with a very different geographical kind of endowment and characteristics. But I think that creating the right incentives and bringing the farmers and the you know, the industry in that sector together with us,
correct,
is going to be one of the key elements, you know. And we're devoting a big share of the European money, of the Next Generation EU funds, to modernize the water management systems, to digitalize and make more sustainable agri-food industries. we are really making this one of our top priorities because we want to continue to be a world superpower in this area, but we will certainly need to proceed with a transition which involves all of us. And I think the experience in the Netherlands is showing, how challenging this can be. Just to bring a different angle. And then where is the money coming from? I very much agree. We need the financial sector to join us. We are finalizing a green paper. It can only be a green paper, right? On green finance. We've been working with the colleagues in the Treasury for a long period of time, with the Bank of Spain, with the share markets, with the stock markets, to see precisely how to mobilize public and private financing towards this sustainable finance. I think the money is there, but we need to indeed create the right incentives and disincentives so that we do invest the large amounts which are necessary for Europe to continue to lead in all these sectors. We have no time to lose.
If I may use as an example, the Dutch financial sector has taken a lot of steps actually to sort of measure and benchmark and be transparent in reporting on what is considered to be green financing. To avoid allegations, of course, of greenwashing, to be clear on the standards, to have the comparability, and therefore also sort of engineer continued competitiveness amongst one another. And ultimately, the investor or the client can choose. What we've said to them, they've made voluntary commitments. Please produce at a certain time how your own reporting on how well you've done. If it's not happening fast enough, there's always the choice of opting for legislation. Now, we do not want to use legislation as a stick to continuously sort of frighten or push. It should be helpful, and it should create a level playing field within the same sector. So far, considerable progress has been made. Ultimately, the sector itself and us have said these are the results, that's good, but we'd like to see more. So sometimes you can do it on a voluntary basis, and sometimes you find at a national or ideally European level, legislation can be helpful because it sets a level playing field, it reinforces the internal market, and it provides a standard for all. And I think certainly when it comes to the private sector and its role in financing in, for instance, enabling the achievement of public goods such as fighting climate change, but it could also be part of the green and digital economy, then I think we need to have the clarity and the strength again of the market, and being one block, the union, having that level playing field is a helpful impetus internally but also externally, because that way we also influence the global market and the global discussions. And I think the time is now. So your examples are spot on. And we should use a few sectors we know that are strategically important to us as a union, as well as that can be helpful or influential or powerful when you look at the global level. We shouldn't wait. For instance, the response or the panicky reaction sometimes to the introduction of the Inflation Reduction Act by the United States, we've talked about it before, I found unhelpful. We didn't need to be shy. Yes, fine that the Americans want to drive that agenda. We're spending more money per capita. We should see it as an invitation to do even better in a sort of friendly, competitive manner, because the US is an important ally to us, not just from a transatlantic perspective. We are democratic players and strong partners, and we'll forge a future together. So friendly competition is helpful. And I think that's now the approach we're taking to the Inflation Reduction Act. But we should not wait. And I think our problem very often is we are producing fantastic papers, we are having our own internal processes, and sometimes we need to act with a greater sense of alacrity and a sense of urgency. And I know the Spanish presidency will project that from day one.
I'm very happy to see that we don't need to be shy, that we have to move forward and fast. That, I think, it's the real point. The second story, it's this friendly, competitive context I like a lot. But I will say, can we see this concept inside the European Union? I mean that state aids are also a very important component of the new industrial policies. Do you fear that these new re-emergence of industrial policies are going to put at risk, or you have to be very careful about the unintended consequences of these industrial policies on the single market, because maybe we have to be very, very careful that these state aid policies, industrial policies, are not putting on risk what are the most valuable asset we have, which is the single market. That is what makes possible to have Europe on a standing foot in the world level. But there are some concern in some places that this could have a negative impact. Not always, it's not unintended consequences, but unintended consequences, but are important. Do you feel that the single market has to be defended in some way?
Yeah, two very brief points on this. We have discussed this, and I think the Netherlands and Spain were very much aligned. Yeah. We defend a level playing field. We think the internal market is one of the key assets that we have in Europe, and we have to protect it. So no doubt about it. But we also need to streamline state aid procedures. Yeah. We need to ensure proportionality and reduce red tape. Yeah. Also, when we're talking about reporting, just now we were saying, I have some colleagues here that have been working on these, sustainability reporting, non-financial reporting. We need to ensure that the burden is not disproportionate on SMEs, that we accompany also the sectors so that they see it's win-win. It's good for them to be more transparent because then they will be attracting more investment, but without being disproportionate. And likewise with state aid control. Right now, Europe needs to undertake massive investments. We can do them with national budgets, with the European budget, or rather, we will have to do them with the national budgets and the European budget, and the private sector has to be, accompanying and heavily investing. So we need to mobilize all our tools and all our instruments. I think that is a fact, and in the trying not to lose or throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So we have to make sure that we do not distort competition or weaken our internal market in the process. It's not easy, but I think there's quite a clear alignment of priorities around the table. Not even the largest economy in Europe can go alone on this front. Yeah. I think that's one of the lessons we've learned from the pandemic, but most recently also from the war in Ukraine. We are stronger together, and this is a battle we need to fight together.
Yeah. No, very much agree. I mean, here I think our position will not be so surprising to you. We are not opposed to a temporary easing of the state aid rules because we felt it was important. Very much what Nadia said, we have to be very mindful of not inadvertently undercutting the strength of the single market. And we also, frankly speaking, where we've seen where the funds have been going to in the past, it is to one or two of the largest countries. Kudos to them. But if we want to have a proper industrial policy and you use state aid for that purpose, many other countries should also be able to create their industrial champions. So we need to have a smart policy, which is the industry of the future? Where could it be based? Which are the players? And I think we need to be sort of mindful of that risk. Equally so, when we're looking at the additionality of funding again, the EIB can play a significant role. There's also other funds we make available. So not everything is via state aid or the temporary easing of state aid, but less of the admin burden, which is what I think most of the companies are complaining of, that it takes too long, too much red tape, clarity on the decision making. The contrast with the US tax credits is often cited. It's clear, simple system. We can't introduce it, but let's at least see where we can simplify the procedures. Yeah. So companies and investors know, I'm going to make use of this, I'm going to apply, and you can factor this into your decision-making process. That would, I think, go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. You have completely answered all the questions I have received until now. Well, we have just left 10 minutes. We are going to raise the last question, and afterwards I will have maybe one or two questions here. If someone can join us and wants to make a new question, please send your question to actividades@rielcano.org. Both of you start your conversation that I have enjoyed a lot. Talking about more, there is more than economy. There are values, Nadia explicitly say. How we can make Europe more inclusive and more resilient to the geopolitical risk we have, the crisis that we have. How do you see how we can send the citizens a message of hope that we have learned and we have shown that we have learned, and the way we have dealt this crisis has nothing to do with what happened 10 years ago, but maybe a step further. How we increase the trust of citizens in the way that we can face this challenge to make Europe more resilient, more competitive, more efficient, to grow more, and to have a sustainable and inclusive growth. How do you see this?
It's a tough one. I know I'm acutely aware that you have elections on the 23rd of July. I'll first take it to a national level, the Netherlands, because we are currently faced with what I could characterize as a trust deficit by many citizens and voters in current institutions of state, in the government, in mainstream political parties that in the past decades have always done very well. Most parties that would be sort of considered to be moderate, out of a moderate movement. And we're finding it very difficult, increasingly so, to transcend the policies we have, to communicate about them, to make people feel that politics is for them and stands next to them. And it's not the choices we're making necessarily. Yes, you can disagree ideologically, but if you're looking at the mainstream, sort of the group of mainstream parties around investments in education, tackling climate change, or dealing with the nitrogen crisis, a lot of funding is set aside, funding for the most vulnerable in society. So all those choices are being made. And yet, over the last years, the trust factor in national politics and politicians is at an all-time low. Now, if somebody was listening, they would say, yes, because you're all failing. Okay, that's the critics. But it will apply, and it applies to most parties that have been in and out of government for a long time. That's a big issue for all of us in times of transition, times of transformation, a time where the world feels very overwhelming. And then you get to Europe, often characterized as Brussels. Brussels as sort of characterized as sort of anonymous, unelected civil servants that decide your fate. So the perception and feeling of alienation and a lack of control over decisions that affect your life is very real in the lives of many. And it's upon us, it's incumbent upon us somehow to try to recreate that sense of Europe is there for you. Of course, national politics stands next to you, is there to serve you, not to decide over you, but yet decisions need to be made. So we're living in a very tricky era, and unfortunately the role of social media can drive a wedge. It can create fake news, it can actually interfere with elections, it can interfere certainly with messaging in a way that is hard to counter when it concerns fake news or actual attempts to undermine democratic processes. Because ultimately everyone is elected, serves, until you no longer serve. And policy making and decision making, I think, is increasingly challenging under these conditions. So how we can make Europe more resilient and how we can make citizens feel Europe is working for you, I think, is the biggest challenge we face right now. It's not financing. It's not even the fights we might have over budgets. It's not the discussion over the Stability and Growth Pact. It's the very essence of rule of law, of our democratic systems, and of the clarity and transparency of the politics of the future. It's a very challenging time, in my experience. Very challenging. It's not intellectually challenging. It is the decision-making and the courage of leadership to stand also by the difficult choices. Because we can go all directions, but we will collectively fail. And that, I think, is a big worry for all of us. How to transcend and how to translate again the complexity of the choices we need to be making for the benefit of all. So I'm not answering your question.
No, you are answering the question.
It's a struggle. Yeah.
Nadia.
No, I think it's extremely enlightening that you're saying these are some of the key challenges, because they are quite similar in all countries around us. All European countries are living through the same kind of movements in their society, where citizens have a lot of uncertainty. They feel uncertain about the world of the future. What is it going to be like? What will it be for my children, for my grandchildren? Because we are all sure that it's going to be very different to the world of the past.
Yeah.
As I said in my first intervention, these tectonic plates are moving, and so people feel like, I don't know, where am I heading? Yeah? Paradoxically, this is the time where Europe has provided a good response, a positive response to the pandemic. We developed the vaccine.
Yeah.
You know, we were able to vaccinate all our populations and to protect citizens. We protected the economy, we protected jobs, we protected household incomes so that we could have a strong recovery. It's totally different to the response that was given to the great financial crisis. So this time around, it was clear that together we were stronger, that we acted in a decisive, effective manner based on solidarity. And so we should be much more certain about our own ability to confront the challenges of the future. But that message somehow doesn't come through.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the rise of populism and polarization right at the time where Europe is really the beacon amongst international powers that are not democratic. And here, you know, it's not a euphemism, or it's not a, we see that Putin's Russia is not a democratic country, and that it is a threat to the values that have underpinned the European project since it was created after the Second World War. So never has it been more important than now to stand together and to stand firm, and for our populations to support and fight for our values, you know. So it is a bit of a paradox. I very much share your message that it's difficult to convey our messages and to explain our policies because there's so much noise and so much uncertainty around us. But since we are democratic parties and democratic systems, that's all we have, right?
That's right.
Do the right thing, explain it, do what you say what you do, and reinforce trust of citizens in our systems, which, frankly, have proven to be the best, actually, to confront whatever comes in the future and whatever challenges we may be confronted with at national, European, or global level.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, my question, or the question that the audience has sent us, were talking about fiscal pact, was talking about monetary union and capital markets union and banking union. We're talking about IRA. Most of them has been already answered by you. I have here some very, very punctual question that maybe could be interesting. Say, some leading European environmental think tanks are claiming that the fiscal space is too narrow in the current European Commission proposal to allow the investment needed to climate mitigation and adaptation. Would you agree to add flexibility, and how?
No, I know. I think that's a different way of asking for sort of a green golden rule. At least that's how I understand the question, potentially. We are not in favor of that because some countries would say the green golden rule, legitimate in its own right. Others would say we want the sort of the bullet defense rule, also legitimate in and of its own right. Ultimately, it's within the purview and responsibility of governments to make choices. We all have to. You need to prioritize, and you need to make sure that the ease of doing business and the enabling environment economically is the right one for investors to come in, to step in, to stay there, and ensure that the reforms are happening. I'm not convinced that an exceptional clause, one or the other, will help us. I think it will detract us. It will get us further of our common goals, and it risks undermining the communality of effort and ultimately touches then also on the stability of the Eurozone. So I think it's also fairly risky. But these are difficult times, and they call for difficult choices. So it comes back to the leadership issue.
Trade offices. Okay, we have reached our time. Thank you very much. I don't know.
Thank you so much.
I have enjoyed a lot, and I think
Thank
that
you.
all the public also. Please join me in applauding our minister.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great moderation.